Every one of us must live with darkness and light. That's why Jesus came, to show us that light always overcomes darkness, even when it looks hopeless. But Jesus didn't promise a life without troubles. In fact, he tells us not to worry about tomorrow, for each day has enough trouble of its own. Today on The Perspective with Pastor Mike Sherbino and Mitch Hunter, worry, it's a killer. Long ago, Mark Twain coined the phrase, "Most of the things I worry about never happened." But that's easier said than done, right? Today, author Allison Brown, whose latest book, Don't Let What If Ruin What Is, a work aimed at moms who too often sleep with their eyes closed. Allison knows what she speaks of as she shares her own story of once being a chronic worrier and how to break free for good.
Hey, glad you're with us today on The Perspective. Now, I don't know about you, but do you worry? Do you ever struggle with what's going to happen next? Do you start to panic and have anxiety? And well, I thought that our resident marriage professional, Mitch, after how many months of marriage now?
Just about 8 months now, Mike.
Okay, Mitch, so what do you worry about as a newly married man?
Well, there's one fear that I never used to have, but since being married, it's really cropped up, and that is the cutlery drawer. And you see, Mike, I'd never known this. It's nice cutlery, or so my wife tells me. And so when they get stuck and you try to pull it out, you pull it too hard, you bend the forks, you get in trouble. And so that's my fear, is the forks being all jumbled up.
Mitch, I'm a pro in that department, okay? It took me about 20 years to figure this out. But rather than just throw the forks in, you should place them in neatly, as my wife has told me for over 40 years.
Well, Mike, I'm always learning. What about you in marriage? What's something you're still afraid of, worry about?
Listen, I still am afraid that if I change the sheets on the bed, you know, the fitted sheet,
Sure.
I just don't get it under the corners tight enough. And many times when I think I've done a great job, I come in, we have to start over again. And
That's how it goes.
yeah, the other problem is I probably will never in this lifetime learn how to load the dishwasher correctly. I'm sure there's a
Just
video
keep
on it.
stacking it in there, Mike. That's my technique.
But that's maybe a little lighter approach to the subject of worries.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
we're having a little bit of fun, but
Yeah.
I know that for many people, it's something that they struggle with.
Mhm.
I struggle with it. You struggle with it. And so today, I just want to say to you that as you're watching The Perspective, we want to unpack the subject of worry. How does it take away from our life rather than giving life to us? And with us today is an amazing author. Her name is Allison Brown, and I want to welcome her today to the program. Allison, thanks for being with us. We're so glad you've come.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, you know what? I'm going to let Mitch throw the first question at you today as we unpack the whole subject of worry.
Yeah, well, Allison, I just want to jump right in, and it's so easy to say, don't worry, and I know that you are a mom. It's easy for people to say, hey, don't worry about our kids, don't worry about what's in the news. I hear all that, but it's much easier said than done. So just jump right in. Tell us about your book, Don't Let What If Ruin What Is. What's that all about?
Yeah, so I like to say I wrote the book after I survived the storm. And that's essentially what it was for me. Worry was like a storm for me. It was something that I didn't even realize that I did until I realized that I did it a lot. And it started to impact my sleep. It took away my sleep. It took away my peace. It took away my joy. It affected my thought life. And I started to actually parent from a place of worry. So I was not letting my children do things that children want to do, like climb trees, because I was worried that they would fall and hurt themselves. And I started to literally parent from that place of fear rather than just letting them be kids.
Well, so I mean, a natural follow-up question. I think there's a healthy amount where people should be concerned about different things. But how is it that you are able to look and say, I actually worry too much? Give us some signs that I can look for in my own life and folks at home can be aware of.
Yeah. So when it starts to affect your sleep, so I tell everyone I didn't know that this was something that I even did until I had my first ultrasound. And I went home that night. My husband slept, as husbands do. And I was wide awake until 2 o'clock in the morning thinking, like, what if my shampoo's toxic for the baby? Or what if I'm eating all the wrong foods? And I would periodically wake him up, and he would just say, just go back to bed. It'll be fine. We'll figure it out. But I couldn't go back to bed. And that was the first sign and telltale to me that, this is more than just, a couple thoughts in my mind. This is actually affecting my sleep. It's taking away my sleep. It's taking away my ability to be calm and have peace in my life. So if it's doing that for you, if it's robbing your peace, it's robbing your sleep, if it's kind of, you go over every worst case scenario in your mind and you're Googling more, it's not okay. It's not a healthy way to live. It's a real experience. So it's not that there's something wrong with you necessarily, but it's a healthier way to live is to worry less and to not go there all the time with your mind. So if that's something that happens for you, I can totally relate to that. And I'm here to tell you that you absolutely can get control of your thought life and be free of living from that place of fear and anxiety and worry.
So here's a question, because I know you're a Jesus follower, and Jesus said this statement that oftentimes throws us off guard, causes guilt in our life. He said we're not to worry. And how do you unpack that? In light of what you're saying, you could be lying there awake at night, wondering about the ultrasound as you just described, and you're thinking, oh, I'm really bad. I'm not a Jesus follower like I should be because he said I'm not to worry. So how do you interpret the words of Jesus?
Yeah, so he gave us a lot of things. He said, "Be anxious for nothing." How can I be anxious for nothing when I feel anxious for everything? And he said, "Fear not," 365 times, one for every single day of the year. And yet, how can I do that? And that was something I definitely struggled with. There was a tension for me when I read, "Worry not for tomorrow." How do I practically implement that into my life? And what actually happened for me is that I got on a turbulent plane and I had my very first panic attack. And I said a very non-eloquent prayer. I said, "God, please help me." And immediately I had the peace that surpasses all understanding. He says in the Bible, he will give us the peace that surpasses all understanding. And that physically flooded over my body. The panic attack, if you've ever had one, you know what I mean when I say I felt like I was going to die. My heart was racing through my chest and my thoughts were racing faster and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I said that very desperate prayer, and immediately I was calm. And I knew it was a supernatural experience that I can only say that he answered. And what I was missing with those Bible verses, like "worry not for tomorrow," is the one that says, "Come to me. Come to me, all you who are burdened, and I will give you rest." And I wasn't coming to him. I wasn't bringing, my worries to him. He says, "Cast all your cares upon me." And the word cast, my wonderful pastor shared, means a two-handed overhand throw. Throw them at him, not just like bring them to him, throw them at him. And so I didn't necessarily know how to do that. But when I came to him and I asked him for help and I said, "God, please help me," in that moment of desperation, he immediately answered that prayer. And then over the course of a number of years after that prayer, he came in and he showed me how to gain control of my thought life. And he showed me how to practically implement those Bible verses into my life by first, instead of worrying myself into a tangent, pausing and praying and saying, "God, I'm doing it again because I'm human and I repeat these things. But I need your help here in this moment." And over the course of many years, he showed me how to rely on him more for the peace that I was needing so much in my life.
Well, Allison, let me just jump in and ask you. And I think a lot of these things you brought up about coming to Jesus for peace, I would love to take that up in the second interview. Let me just ask you in the next 20 seconds or so, as we wrap up this first interview, do you think we live in a society that contributes to anxiety and to worry?
Absolutely. I think you don't have to look very far to be worried, to be afraid, to be anxious, or to have those thoughts fueled, right? Unfortunately, that is the world that we live in. There's so much to worry about. The good news is that he is peace and he is calm and he brings us everything we need in order to have that in our life. We can just choose to look at the worry, the fear, the anxiety, or we can choose to look at him.
But Allison, let's think about that in a moment. I'm going to ask our viewers to stay with us because we're talking today to Allison Brown, who's written an amazing book on worry and how to process it. We're going to come back and ask her a little bit about the FIRE process as well, a key phrase in this whole subject that we're unpacking together. We'll be right back.
John Tesh with you with now more reasons to spend time in nature, or even better, to live near a forest or a tree-filled park. Here are two. First, it reduces stress and it boosts your brain power. So researchers in Germany found that living within sight of trees strengthens the area of the brain that processes emotions like fear and anxiety, which makes people better at coping with stress. In fact, listen to this. Spending time in natural settings cuts the risk of an early death by a full 16 to 18%. Why are trees so beneficial? It's partly because we humans find green calming, since it's the color of spring and renewal. Plus, green is in the middle of the light spectrum. So just looking at the color creates a natural balancing effect on the body and brain. So what if there aren't any trees in your neighborhood? The good news is researchers say just looking at photographs or videos of forests will reduce stress in your world.
Well, we're back with Allison Brown, and she is a women's health expert and an author. And we're talking today about the whole subject of worry. Allison has written a book on worry called Don't Let What If Ruin What Is. And you can find that on momentumformom.com. You can also find it on Amazon. So just, Allison, jump in and give us a bit of a taste of the book. You discuss the FIRE process and with dealing with worry. What is that?
Yeah, so it's a little acronym I kind of created with the foundation, the F starting for faith, representing faith. And the most important thing is what we need in our lives so that we have a good foundation and we're putting our faith in God versus our faith in the world. That's essentially what the F is for.
Before you go on, I've just got to ask you, because I know some viewers at home are going to hear that and they're going to say, well, Mitch, well, Allison, Mike, because this is a Christian program, of course you have to say faith. I actually don't need faith to deal with worry. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I maybe used to think that too until it completely, took over my life and affected my life and stole my peace and my joy. And then I realized very quickly, no, I really do need something greater than me to take care of this problem for myself.
So, Allison, in your daily ritual, I mean, dealing with 3 boys and a husband, is he the 4th child that you have? But apart from all of that, there's a lot of stress. There's anxiety. There's things to worry about. Do you particularly begin your day in a certain manner? And are there things that you pause and say, okay, you know what, I'm really starting to worry again? What do you do at that moment? What are your checks?
I used to just let my mind race to every worst case scenario, but now I absolutely pause and I start with prayer, and I start with just giving my children to God every single day. I know they're in His hands, and I just need that reminder every time. So prayer is so important. It's a huge part of my life.
Well, show us what that's like. I mean, show us, but when you say, you give your kids to God, what would you actually pray? Like, do you just pause, or are you on the fly, or do you get away in some corner and have a cup of coffee?
Yes, I have my cup of coffee and I just say a quiet prayer to Him. God, thank you for my children. And I just thank you that they're in your hands and not mine, because my hands are not perfect and yours are. And I just trust that, they'll be safe and you'll be with them today.
Right on. Well, so I'm just wondering, sorry, Mike, if you have a question.
No, I was just going to say, and so when you offer that prayer, I remember you saying in the first part of the interview how you cried out to God and there was an incredible sense of peace. And I just have this sense that people are watching right now, and it's very easy for this conversation to go over someone's head if they're in the midst of quicksand, or maybe they're dealing with cancer or a financial crisis and they're just overwhelmed. I'd like you to just unpack a little bit more about what happens when you pray.
Yeah, when you pray, there's a calm. There's an immediate calm, because we're going to a God who is greater and who has us and who loves us. Most importantly, He loves us. And it says in the Bible, perfect love casts out all fear. When we know that we are loved by a good Father, we don't have to worry and we don't have to be afraid. And I know that's easier said than done for people who are struggling with real life situations. But I can say from personal experience, I've been in those real life situations many, many times. And when I can go to Him in prayer, I can have a peace that really does surpass all understanding, knowing that I took this to Him and now I can trust him with it.
Well, so let me ask you about some common phrases. People say, I'm an optimist. I always look on the bright side. Or I'm a pessimist. I just see the negative. Or some people say, I'm not either one of those. I'm a realist. I just see things for the way they are. And people like to maybe make fun of some of those terms or say that certain ones are better than others. What do you think of that whole discussion? Should we, as people of faith, as people who come to Jesus and trust him with our worries, should we consider ourselves pessimistic or optimistic or realists? Or what do you think about that discussion?
I think that he has it all in his hands. I know that. So we might look at a situation like this is really bad, but sometimes the hardest situations where we might be pessimist are the best things for us. Because it says in the Bible, he works all things together for the good. So whether we look at it like this is bad or this is good, or I'm a realist, this is how it is, he has a different view than we do. His ways are higher than our ways. And so we might look at something like this is a horrible situation. And I did when I was having a panic attack on a very turbulent flight, thinking that, my plane is going to crash here. I thought this is very bad, but it was one of the most pivotal moments for me because it was an opportunity for me to come to God for the first time with a situation that I had battled with for way too long and just put my faith into something greater than me rather than trying to do it all on my own.
Well, Allison, having 3 boys and still being alive to do this recording today is credit to you. That means you must have a certificate in motherhood. But give us a couple tips for new moms and also for older moms on how to handle worry. Just some of the basic things coming out of your book, but also just out of your day-to-day experience.
Yeah, so I've joked with a few people that there might be a book too on worry coming soon because I'm about to bring 3 teenage boys. So we're not quite there yet. But I will say that having littler ones, there's still a lot to worry about on a daily basis. And bringing that to God every single day is so important for me. That's faith, the foundation. That's the F in the word fire, because worry is like a fire, and the fire that we feed is the one that's going to grow in our life. So as a busy mom, if I take the time to feed the fire of worry and constantly think about what could go wrong, I'm not going to be a productive mom for anyone. And so I have to go and give it to God and put my faith in him and trust that, every single day, no matter what happens, and there will be things that happen, and there always are, but no matter what, depending on how I look at it or how it's looked at in God's eyes, he will be with us. He loves us through it, through the hard times, through the struggles, through the worries. And, ultimately at the end of the day, my children are his children. And I'm just having to trust that every day that, these are your kids, God, and you're protecting them and you're with them just like you do for me as well.
Well, Allison, just in the last 30 seconds or so, I'm thinking about the person who's been listening to this interview and they're saying, okay, there must be something here, but they're asking themselves, can I really be free from worry? Would you answer that person's question? And if the answer is yes, what is the first step, just in the last 30 seconds?
I will say absolutely you can be free from worry. And it's 100% your choice. And I know that sounds so simple, but I also know how complex that process can be. It's a choice to put your faith in God and trust and go to him and bring him everything you struggle with on a daily basis, or to try to do it yourself, try to combat worry, anxiety, stress, look at the world and everything that's going on in it and let your mind drift to all the worst case scenarios. You really do have a choice and you really can have freedom. And yes, I still worry. I tell people all the time, yes, I can absolutely still worry. The difference now is that I get to choose whether or not I'm going to go there. And I would much rather take the time to pause and put my faith in God rather than put my faith in fear.
Allison, I want to thank you for just being so transparent and making it so simple for me to understand. That was huge. You've written an amazing book called Don't Let What If Ruin What Is. And I want to encourage our viewers to get a copy of that today. Allison, thanks for being with us on the show. And everyone else, stay with us. We're going to be right back. You know, as we've been talking about worry and listening to what Allison has been saying, I remember an article I read recently about two famous Hollywood actors and a California governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. They were talking, Mitch, about heaven. They weren't sure that either of them really believed in it. This life is all there is. And I began to think, if that's our way that we approach life, how are we going to handle the issues of life, like fear, anxiety, distress? How are we going to cope?
Absolutely.
Faith is so key, isn't it?
Yeah, and Mike, that's what I was asking Allison when I said, why is it that faith is necessary to combat worry? And I know some people don't believe that. And at a certain point, I can't convince everybody to believe what I believe. I can only share from my own life. And I'm sure you would say the same, that when I have cast my cares on Jesus, that's been the difference between complete panic and complete calm. And I can't convince anybody of that. I can only share that that's what he has done for me.
That becomes absolutely huge. And so we want to invite you on that journey to join us right now as I go offset and teach God's word in maybe an environment that you recognize, but a place that I hope will bring peace in your life.
Hi, I'm Rachel Joy Barbeau, former national sportscaster, founder of I'm Changing the Narrative, and upcoming author of a book called Relentless Joy. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But first, I want to drop a nugget of wisdom on you. Have you even pondered? I talk about this in my upcoming book, what your ancestors went through. I'm talking about your grandmother's grandmother and your grandfather times 20 for you to even be alive today. Odds are they went through being displaced from their land. They might have gone through slavery. They might have gone through the Depression. They might have gone through food scarcity. You don't know what they went through just for you to be alive today. So let me drop this on you. How dare you not go for that dream? How dare you not go for that job? How dare you not start that business? How dare you not mend that relationship? How dare you not live your life to the absolute fullest? They gave everything for you to be alive today. And so did Jesus, by the way. They lived their life. They overcame so much just for you to be alive today. So go and do it. And also, please grab a copy of Relentless Joy. I'd love to connect with you and see you soon.
Well, as we travel down the road of life, we all want to be prepared. We want to know what's coming next. But unfortunately, that's not how life spells it out. As much as we want to be prepared, the question comes back over and over again, who can we trust? And what does it look like, especially if we're trusting in God? For the next few days, I want to talk about what that trust looks like. We'll find our thoughts anchored in a verse that some of you have heard, maybe memorized. Others of you, it's going to be for the first time. It's in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. And we read these words. It says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." Maybe you pause and say, is that really true? Does everything work together for my good? Well, we're going to discover in a moment in the life of the child of God that we're looking about God's good. And we're saying when we trust him as our Savior, Lord, you can do through my life what you want to do. I want your good to be done. And in the midst of that, I'm going to trust that you know what's happening in my life. You see, God calls us to be conquerors, and he calls us to be his children at the same time. Let's think more about what this phrase is all about. Paul said with great certainty, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him. The phrase, "and we know," really is a statement of huge confidence. He is saying, you know what? That those who know their God will be strong and do great exploits. That's taken out of the book of Daniel, chapter 11. What does it mean to know God? Well, when Paul was writing here to the church, he realized that the Greeks often use two different words to describe know. The first one, I hope you're impressed with this, is called gnosko. And gnosko implies a progressive knowledge, like I'm getting to know you. Hey, can I explain it this way? When I got married, I thought I knew everything about my wife, and she thought she knew everything about me. But guess what? Over 40 years later, she knows a whole lot more, and I know a whole lot more. It's like we're getting to know you. But that's not the word that Paul uses. Instead, he uses a different word that changes the landscape of how you view the road you're on right now. He uses a word that's called oida. And oida implies that the object has simply come within the scope of the knower's perception. In other words, God is saying, I'm revealing myself to you so that you can understand what is happening, so that you can live with confidence and know that I am in control. And so when Paul writes this, he says, and we know, it's with the confidence that even though we might not know what's going to happen tomorrow, we can know the God who knows all things, who's created the end from the beginning. I love the next little phrase that he uses. He says, and we know that in all things. The language Paul uses here talks about every detail of life. Folks, I'm talking about from flat tires to the major crisis. And oftentimes as a pastor, there is seldom a week, oftentimes not a day that goes by that I don't hear of a crisis. It can be cancer, it can be financial, it can be a mental health struggle. The issues are endless. I hear them all the time. And that's why I find great comfort in this passage that God says, and we know that in all things, he was working out things for his good. Do you get frustrated when you get the flat tire? You get frustrated when the guy cuts you off on the highway? How about when the tractor trailer does that? You ever see that little slogan on the back that says, call 1-800 to talk about my driving? And whenever the guy cuts me off, that 800 number is never there, just never there. What's that all about? Well, it says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good. Let me unpack it this way as we wrap up today. I think we look to the Old Testament, the story of Joseph. Remember, he was sold by his brothers into slavery. They wondered why, but eventually he became number 2 in the land of Egypt. And he was able to stockpile grain so that when the famine hit, people's lives would be spared. When his brothers finally met him face to face, he said these words, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." It was a hard go for Joseph, but he realized that God was writing a bigger story. Daniel had 3 friends, and they said, we're not going to recant our faith, even if we're thrown into the lion's den. How could they say such a thing? Because they knew that God was writing a bigger story. And we know that in all things, God is working for his good to those who love him. And when God's good is being played out and we're partnering with him, regardless of how difficult it might be for you, as it is for me, we can trust him and we can rest in the assurance that he is with us. And we know that in all things, your thing today, God is there. He knows all about it. He's saying, will you trust me? Will you surrender your situation to me, believing that I'm going to lead you and guide you in ways far greater than you could ever imagine?